Welcome back. All right, so the day of the start of the Stanley Cup final every year, Gary Bettman sits down, he talks to the press, he talks about league business, all that fun stuff. I prefer to watch the entire press conference myself, and so I watched it this morning. Just finished it up, and so I'm going to talk about the notes that I took down. I have seen people asking, why can't I read the board? I want like the board is more for me than anybody else. When the channel was starting out, I didn't have a whiteboard, and I would find that I forgot things and missed things, and so the whiteboard's there for me to make sure I don't miss things of importance. So there you go. All right. So Hockey Fights Cancer was the way they started this out, talking about the Hockey Fights Cancer partnership at 25 years, saying that they've raised a total of $36 million for cancer research. So good on them for that. They then got into the Four Nations tournament, revealed that Montreal and Boston will host the Four Nations tournament, which runs from February 12th till February 20th. I'm not really enthused about this. I just see it as like a warm up for the Olympics. And in my brain, I'm going, oh, the Olympics are going to be fun. I can't wait to watch the Olympics. It starts in Montreal for the first four games, February 12th, Canada versus Sweden, 13th, USA versus Finland. On the 15th, there's a doubleheader, Finland versus Sweden, and then USA versus Canada. And then on February 17th, Canada plays Finland in Boston. And February 17th, Sweden plays USA in Boston. And then the final will be on the 20th of February, also in Boston. So there's some days off in between. It really doesn't make me think I have to watch all this. I'm honestly, and I mean, people know that I do my vacations in August and early February. I look at this and think to myself, I could probably take a vacation at the start of it. I'd still be home in time to report on the final, and then we can discuss. But I'm not really enthused about it. And the first six players for each team will be revealed on June the 28th. So we'll know who the first six players are for each team, and we'll see how it goes from there. There was a new record for NHL attendance this season. I did talk about that in a news video as well. Makes sense. You've got Seattle in the fold, and attendance was at 97%. This attendance record will be broken again next year because Utah can get a lot more fans into their arena than Arizona had in theirs. So you have to think it's going to be sellouts every night. And with that being the case, we're going to see the attendance record get broken again next season. These have been the most watched playoffs in the U.S. since 1996. Those were the playoffs, of course, where Colorado beat Florida in the final. Those were some fun playoffs. And then he talked a lot about parity in the league and how we didn't know who was going to face who until the very last days of the season, and who was going to win divisions and all that, which is fine. But there have also been seasons where there's no tension at all when it comes to who's going to make the playoffs and who isn't. So it's not a guarantee that because this year ended up this way that next year would as well. The highest percentage of close games in playoff history. Yep, we've had that as well. And again, a lot of talk about how great the playoffs have been. I'm not going to disagree. These playoffs have been good, but I have seen people saying it's a bit predictable. Really, if you go back through all the polls on the channel, the team that was favored to win by fans is usually the one that's won. We almost had all four of the division winners as the final four teams standing, which again isn't bad. But Bettman talked about how it was, really unpredictable, and I'm thinking it's not the most unpredictable playoffs. You were around in 2019. Those to me are the most unpredictable recent playoffs. And overall, the most unpredictable playoffs, I'd go all the way back to 1993. If we're going to talk about unpredictable playoffs, I could do a top 10 list on that, couldn't I? The cap max has been set at $88 million. So that was the rumor. That's come through. Instead of $87.7 million, it's an extra $300,000, which doesn't sound like a lot, but just think about how many teams are right up at the cap. And so that extra space will help. And it's a $65 million maximum. What I got a kick out of was that Bettman said $85 million, and Bill Daly corrects him right away. And I thought, man, it's like the phone call. It's come to life. It's like the Bettman phone call. What are you doing, Gary? No, $85 million is not the minimum. $65 million is the minimum, Gary. So then they get into the Q&A portion. And sometimes the Q&A portion can get a little bit hot, and there can be arguing. There really wasn't that this year. Strong revenue led to the higher maximum for the cap. I mean, we know that, right? The NHL's making really good money, and they're quite happy with how things are going. They didn't give a no on expansion. The question of expansion came up, and Bettman dodged around it like, Neo from the Matrix. But it's a not now. They haven't come up with a formal process for expansion. They're going to have to, though, because obviously if Morello gets that building, if that bidding goes through this month, and if he can say, I'm getting this building, and if he can trigger the expansion process for Arizona, they're going to have to come up with something, because you don't want a 33-team league, or do you? So we'll see, right? And they said that the Four Nations Cup was kept to Four Nations for time. They didn't have time to have more countries, which to me is weird because you do. And I say that because you could have just split the games between Montreal and Boston for the round robin portion and had games against one another. So, like, as a for instance, you have one game on the 12th. Well, you could have had another game on the 12th in Boston, another game on the 13th in Boston, a game on the 14th. Like, there are ways to do it with more teams without adding extra time. So, I think the second part of the answer was the honest reason why we have Four Nations, which is they only want NHL players involved. So if you're looking at Germany, if you're looking at Czechia, Slovakia, and the idea of combining the Czechs and the Slovaks to bring back Czechoslovakia, it's a fun idea, but the NHL clearly does not have an interest in that. And this is part of the drawback of the tournament. I want to see a best on best international tournament, and I don't want to see it be just NHL players. I have no problem with a team from Switzerland, Germany, Czechia, Slovakia. And honestly, I think that would be great if the NHL came up with a World Cup setup where every country is eligible and non-NHL players can come in. You can work out some kind of an insurance thing if it's insurance you're worried about. The league makes billions and billions of dollars. If they want to employ some European League players, or maybe there's somebody in the AHL that would qualify for a national team, like, you can do it. So it really is. This is a dry run for the Olympics. Clearly, this is a dry run. Like, okay, we're going to set this up. This is, we're going to have a good idea of what we're going to do with the Olympics. These four countries are going to put together rosters that are very similar to what's going to go to the Olympics in 2026. So, regional sports networks. The question was asked, and basically Gary Bettman saying that the regional sport networks are in transition. So, not saying that they're gonna flourish and everything's gonna go great, but also saying that with Bally's being in the process of going through the whole bankruptcy courts thing, there's some uncertainty there about not knowing what's going to happen with Bally and how that's going to affect things. But he did talk about how some teams have been, putting together their own broadcasts, and Utah is going to continue what Arizona started that way, and Vegas has done it as well. And so, yeah, we'll see how it all goes. And of course, Seattle's got a setup there as well. So, regional sports networks, we know that they're going the way of the dodo, and that NHL teams are probably going to have to run their own broadcasts soon enough. At least on the American side, it feels like the Canadian side with Rogers backing it, and TSN as well, that shouldn't be a problem. But yeah, so we'll see what happens with Bally. And Bettman did admit this has gone on way longer than he wanted it to. The cap is likely to keep rising next year and beyond. Obviously, there's some caveats to that. You never know when things are going to change, and maybe there will be a downturn economically. But at this point, it looks like the cap's going to be up to now. The expectation was it'd be $87.7 million this year and $92 million next year. With the cap actually being $88 million this year, maybe we'll look at $92.5 million next year for the salary cap ceiling, right? The good news is we as fans pay for it with higher tickets. And all that fun stuff, and more commercials telling us to go gamble stuff. The relationship with the union being the best it's been, yeah, you can see that. And I think really, with the league and the players making a lot of money, that'll lead to a good relationship. So things are 50-50. It definitely sounds like Bettman and Walsh are on the same page with a lot of things. I don't think they're on the same page with everything. But I think it's enough that there's optimism that in a couple years' time, when the CBA runs out, that they'll be able to sit down and hash something out with that. The question of Marlins Park in Miami and whether or not that might be used for an outdoor game, again, Bettman didn't say no. He did say, I'm not announcing anything, but he basically hinted, yeah, that could work because they have a roof and they have air conditioning, so you can get the building cool. The problem is if you're going to have the roof on it, then it's not the same. To me, it's not the same. I know when Vancouver had an outdoor game, they had to put the roof over BC Place. My reaction was, yeah, Vancouver's never getting an outdoor game again. It's been a long time, and I think I can still say I don't think Vancouver gets an outdoor game again. The odds of getting rain in January is just way too high. and hockey in the rain is it's not great. So and that's the reason you have to put the roof on it. But yeah, Marlins hosting a game, Florida hosting a game. I think that could work. Marlins Park, not the Miami Marlins. Although if they want to strap on skates and go out there and play, it might be entertaining. Just not something that you want to count to your record if you're the Florida Panthers. But yeah, it definitely sounds like Florida will get an outdoor game. Obviously not in the coming season, but probably not long after that. And at this point, Bill Daly's saying they're likely going to have further conversations. There's been talk about the members of Team Canada that have been charged, and they're waiting for the trial, which is going to start. I think it's in September. That trial gets going. So teams are wondering, do we have to qualify these players, or can there be a special exception where we keep the rights to these players without giving them a qualifying offer? At this point, no. They would have to give those players qualifying offers for next season, or they lose the rights to those players. Those players become unrestricted free agents. And saying that a couple of GMs have been in contact with the NHL asking about this. And so it could change. But again, that's going to have to be with the NHL and the NHLPA agreeing together on how you would make that change. And I'm going to say, too, the union might not want to change it because you don't necessarily want to make it where the NHL could keep the rights to a player without qualifying them as a restricted free agent, because you're going down the path towards maybe more players being not necessarily qualified and teams retaining rights. Okay, you gave it to us for this. Can we have it for this? So it may be one of those things where the union just wants to keep things the same. No concerns about a potential rival league. And this may need its own video. Let me be honest. Max Chambers, the name gets brought up. And, I immediately looked it up because this is the Major League Hockey that was discussed by Steve Dangle, who, to his credit, he removed the post not too long after. But clearly there are some in the hockey sphere that are wondering, so what? Or conversely, huh? So I may need to look into this, because as soon as I heard Max Chambers, my first thought was, that name sounds fake. It sounds like Max, like even I mentioned it to Yvonne and she goes, so not Max Power. Exactly. It really reminds me of Max Power. I do have a Simpsons Max Power jersey. I may wear it for said video. I do think there's a video that needs to be made on this because it's really bizarre. It's really weird. And I don't know if any of it's real. But the fact that they're asking this at an NHL press conference, I'm like, what? They're asking this? Like, and what's the NHL going to say? Oh, we're terrified of a rival league. No, because the NHL knows the amount of costs that are involved, how difficult it is to start things up, and that having a bunch of money doesn't necessarily mean success. I would use wrestling as an example here, but people always get mad about wrestling. But there are examples in wrestling of just having a bunch of money and starting up a company doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have great success and surpass other companies, right? So I don't see any problem with a rival league. I don't think there'll ever be a rival league that eats into the National Hockey League. We've seen other leagues and other sports trying that same thing, and it very rarely, if ever, actually works. They did talk about the Utah move. Bettman saying the move's gone better than expected, that the amount of fan support, the way that Utah has really bought into this, they're very excited about this move, and I don't think they're wrong to be excited. It definitely seems like Utah could be a good market for them. And that mean the state of Utah. And it's good too that the team is going to be called Utah, because again, it just feels like it's a state thing more than the Salt Lake City thing. And so yeah, I will say that it is something I noticed too here personally. A lot of interest with Utah, and I've noticed in the comments a lot of people from Utah starting to comment. It's one of those things where I get the reports, and yeah, there's definitely some people from Utah that are now tuning into the channel. Hi. The NHL wants to keep the schedule balanced. This is a conversation we have very often. How important is it to have all 31 teams visit your barn? And the reporter asking the question said he had heard from fans that it's not important. They want to see more divisional games, that the balanced schedule means that divisional playoffs don't make a lot of sense. 1 versus 8 was brought up by Pierre LeBrun, who immediately said, that's not my question, and Bettman said, good. So I think he's tired of talking about it. But Bettman and Bill Daly both said that they've heard from teams and from fans that having all 31 teams visit is important. And I know that there was a point in time where the NHL had where you'd only play the other conference once. So, for instance, if you're in the West, you'd see Sidney Crosby every other year or Ovechkin every other year. Now, in this case, of course, you'd only see Bedard in the East every other year. Owners didn't like it. Owners fought against it, and they wanted every single team coming into their building. If you look at ticket prices, and I speak as just from a Canucks perspective, it feels like the ticket prices can be higher for those teams that are coming in once, and so they're probably saying, you know what, we make more money on tickets by all 31 teams coming in than if we have divisional teams coming in more often. So I don't know that they're necessarily wrong on this, but this is where it gets interesting with expansion, and I talked about this with expansion videos lately. I don't know how you can keep a balanced schedule. Let's say they go to 34 teams. That's now 33 different home games just to get them all in. And they also said they don't want to add a bunch of games to the schedule to keep things going. So something's got to give here, basically. Either you almost get away from divisions, which is something that I don't think the broadcasters want. They like the rivalry games. So I don't know. It's going to be very interesting to see how they handle this going forward. And this did surprise me. It does feel like there's been a shift with general managers, but so managers, majority of GMs want changes to the LTIR, not major changes. And so I don't think it's something that would go as far as a lot of fans want it to. But the NHLPA has to agree. It's a CBA issue. So you have to get the players to sit down with the league and agree on how LTIR should be handled going forward. Keep in mind that for the players, they don't care. It's not of all that much importance to them. Everybody gets paid, and there's different ways to hide how much money your team is costing you. And by that I mean like the 3-team trades, where I'm only paying this amount, but their whole full contract is this. Yeah. Anyways, so they want to keep things balanced, and LTIR changes could happen, but it's going to require a buy-in from the union. So we'll see what happens this summer and if something changes there. Stan Bowman and Joel Quenneville have both applied for reinstatement to the league. Bettman has not sat down with them at this point, has not made a decision one way or the other at this point. He will consider that at a later date. Teams, the question was asked about this fact that the Stanley Cup final could be decided as late as June 24th and how late that is. And I agree. I think that the playoffs now are too late. I think that June 24th is ridiculous. But Bettman's saying teams don't want to start the season in September because that's when the NFL gets going. So should we start the season like in mid-January then? Because that's when the Super Bowl is usually around. It's weird. It's a weird argument to say we don't start our season here because there's this other league that's doing this, and the baseball playoffs. It's just such a weird argument to me, and I don't agree with it. But they also see no issue with the Cup final being late because the ratings have been really high. The ratings have been at a high, both in the U.S. and in Canada. So because things are going well, because people are watching the game, they don't think there's a problem. So there's that. But I would like to see a season start in September. I don't care when the NFL season starts. I don't care about baseball's playoffs and when they take place. And again, it's just this weird... And it does come across then as arguing from a point of weakness that we don't feel like we can draw because, and I don't ever hear that from other sports saying, well, we can't have our season then because the NHL has their season. Like, I don't hear that. So, like, I don't know that the NBA over the last 30 years has scheduled around the National Hockey League for anything, but definitely the reverse happens. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below regarding any of the items on the board. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And, it's another year. And I really did think this press conference was pretty amicable. Wasn't anything really ugly that took place, and that's kind of nice because there have definitely been years where things get kind of rough. And no, nobody asked about a team in Quebec. Wasn't brought up, but Max Chambers. We'll see about when I do a video on that. But it's very interesting. Very, very interesting, isn't it? Let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.